Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, the podcast where Senator Joseph Cryan talks about the latest in New Jersey's 20th Legislative District. This week's guest, Mayor of the City of Elizabeth, J. Christian Bollwage.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Cup of Joe. It is my honor today to be joined by the great Mayor of the City of Elizabeth. He laughs, but I can tell you it's absolutely true, Chris. My friend, and frankly, one of the best mayors in the state of New Jersey. It's an honor to introduce to you J. Christian Bollwage. Chris Bollwage, the Mayor of Elizabeth. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Senator, I appreciate the invitation. I want to let you know this is my first ever podcast.
All right, so we have an historic day today.
That's right.
As Chris moves into the 20th century, 21st.
21st. You just skipped one.
Yes. So, Mayor, I really want folks to know about you today. And really, the gist of this is, I know you're a lifelong resident of the city of Elizabeth, big sports fan. You've been mayor since 1990.
Won the 92 election. January 1st, 93 when I took the oath.
So talk about it for a moment. Talk about it for a couple minutes. You know, coming in, the times, the highlights for you.
Yeah, so, I mean, it started with a 10-year career on the Elizabeth City Council.
Right.
And
Fifth Ward.
Right. On the city council, right. My first taste of politics, as a very young boy, was my father was president of the National Association of Letter Carriers. And he had to run for office, and he would come home and talk about some of the efforts that he needed to do to win that election, which represented 4 cities in Union County. And they went on strike in 67, I believe it was, as a national strike. A guy named Sombrato was the national president, and my father, he was out of New York. My father was close to him, and there was a warrant out for my father's arrest, actually, back then, because letter carriers couldn't strike. So being in 8th grade, knowing your father's got a warrant out for his arrest because of a strike, taught you an awful lot about politics, really.
Sure.
You know, because he was going back and forth on a train to D.C., meeting with congressional representatives and others, trying to resolve this strike. And it was a wildcat strike. Not every city went out. And then, going through high school and starting in college, I worked on Ray Lesniak's campaign for mayor in 1980, which was a losing effort. Kind of was fun. And I guess you know, Senator, you get bit by the bug, right?
Yes.
Happened to you at some point. You and I have spent time talking about our dads in the past, and your dad being politically involved. You get bit at some time by the political bug. Well, I did during that campaign. And then 2 years later, I ran for city council and spent 10 years on the city council. And in 1989, I was the president. And Tom Dunn, who was my predecessor for 28 years, laid off 160 cops and firemen in the middle of 1989. He was in a fight with Speaker Chuck Hardwick at the time on financial aid to municipality. He then, by laying those folks off, caused a great disruption in the community, business community, neighborhoods. And I was the president of city council. So I authored a plan with the other members of city council to save the workers' jobs, which he rejected publicly. And you remember the Daily Journal, right?
Sure
If
do.
you weren't in the Daily Journal, then you didn't exist back then. So there was a lot of back and forth with my leadership on the city council falling in line with my efforts, or agreeing with my efforts as opposed to falling in line, and then Tom Dunn opposing him. So then in 1992, when the mayor's race came up, that's when I sought the mayor's race with the help of Ray Lesniak. Governor Florio was instrumental in that election as well, because he couldn't figure out Tom Dunn. And then after I won, I'll never forget, Governor Florio calls me, and he says, Chris, would you mind meeting with Tom Dunn? Basically, I'm running next year, Chris, and I'd like to know if I can get unified support out of Elizabeth. So I said, the Governor Florio and I had lunch at, do you remember the Cochin 4 in Cranford?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we had lunch there, him and I. We talked about the future, and then I called Tom Dunn. I got yelled at by his secretary, and words that I can't use on the podcast. But I had a 5-hour lunch with Tom Dunn at a place in Westfield. And it was right next to the train station. I don't know if it was a Jolly Trolley. I think it's a seafood place down. I don't know. And for 5 hours, we talked about the campaign, the future of Elizabeth, politics. One of the most engaging conversations I've ever had politically was with Tom Dunn during that time. And I learned a lot. I don't know if he learned anything from me, but he had a cell phone back, car phone. We get in the car and he's driving. We get in the car and we're going back to Elizabeth. He calls his secretary, Sal, and he says, I thought you said Bollwage was a blankety blank. He's not a bad guy. So that was my start. And then in 1993 is when I took the oath of office. But Tom and I didn't have many conversations after that, but we did have a really engaging one in June of 92.
Well, you both love the city.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for 28 years, he did a great job running the city. The last couple of years, I think like all of us, you wind up when that end comes, and can you recognize it? And maybe he didn't, or maybe he did, but it was time, as the electorate said in 1992. But there was a lot to learn from a guy like that who came from really old school politics.
Yeah, very old school.
Right.
Yeah. So as you move into and become the mayor, and just take a couple minutes, the challenges, the things you've seen along the way.
So in early 1993, if you may remember back then, the budgets were on the fiscal year. Most of our towns, because of legislation, are now on a calendar year.
Right.
Not all, but most. But we're now on a calendar year. We switched. But being on a fiscal year, when I arrived and took the oath, half the budget's spent. The people I hire tell me we're $10 million in the hole. So the initial challenge was trying to figure out either how to cut spending, raise taxes, or some combination of getting out of this $10 million hole. So I quickly formed a committee of business people and others in order to at least give advice, well, really politically, to deflect the problem and get some advice. We were able to get out of that with a slight tax increase and some cutbacks in some personnel, not police or fire. But that was the first serious challenge. And in the early 1990s, we did have some serious crime issues with drive-bys and crack cocaine. All of that, drive-bys and crack cocaine have really, they've gone more indoors. You don't, as you know, Senator, you don't have those street corner drug dealers anymore with cell phones.
Yeah,
They've
gone.
driven that inside, and you don't have that issue in neighborhoods anymore. So they were the biggest challenges in the early 1990s. Nobody ever thought of drones, cell phones, social media. That didn't exist.
Well, you know what? I really wanted to go sequentially, but you have such an exciting drone program coming up, and investments in law enforcement and the ballistics lab. And I really want you to talk about the state of the city a little bit, because it was such a great speech. But the investments in law enforcement that you're doing there, which are cutting edge, I know I'm jumping, but can you talk about them a little bit?
So we started in the 1990s, and the first thing we did was create a room where we could have a huge communications. We put up screens in the room where we could tell where every police car was. I remember telling the police department and unions that we're going to put a chip in your car, and we're going to be able to track your car 24/7, and it's going to be a screen in police headquarters, and the dispatchers will then be able to dispatch cars. The union wasn't crazy about it.
No.
They couldn't go get their bread at their favorite restaurant in Kenilworth or Roselle Park because we know when they're leaving town. So the unions opposed it, but I then told them, this is also for your safety. If you're ever caught in an ambush or in any other thing, we know where your car is and we can send help. Some police officers ripped the chip out, and then we started to have to hide the chip in locations and not tell them. Eventually, everybody bought into it, and it became a really strong safety mechanism. But the dispatching system that was set up between the connection to the police car and what people could see in real time on the screens was state of the art in the late 1990s. We had police departments around the state visiting us. We've upgraded that room twice since then. And now, with the drone technology, 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, we bought our first drones. They were rudimentary. They weren't exactly as sophisticated as they are today. We used the drones during COVID to deliver messages to people for 6 6 degrees of separation type of 6 inches or whatever the rules were back then. And we delivered messages to ask people to separate. We had the drones in neighborhoods. And then with the shipboard fire in Newark, it was our drones that were there after those 4 firemen tragically died. It was our drones that helped the firefighters the rest of the way through the heat-resistant ability to locate the firefighters in a very dark area to help extinguish that fire. And just 2 nights ago, we had a police issue and a chase where they were hiding in brush in the port section of the city under tables and everything, and the infrared drones were able to spot the person hiding as well as the gun that he was carrying 20 yards away through the infrastructure and the heat technology. So the drones are we have 22 drones currently, and we have lent them out to other towns when requested in order to use them. We're going to continue updating that. One of my favorite letters was from that wacko Congressman Matt Gaetz when we were buying the drones, and we buying them from DJT, and they supposedly have Chinese influence. I don't know what China would care about what goes on Port Street in the city of Elizabeth. I could never figure that out, but it really bothered Matt Gaetz. And he sent a letter, which I basically threw in the garbage, and I wasn't going to deal with these crazy Republicans in Congress. We've continued to invest in drones. We're going to continue doing that. And now, as you said, in the state of the city, we're going to build our own lab in Elizabeth. So we're not going to have to wait on the prosecutor's office or the state police to analyze mobile data from people's cell phones or ballistic data.
So continually emphasizing and investing in public safety.
We have to, Senator. I mean, hiring police officers is extremely expensive, but also important. You need boots on the ground. But in today's world, you want those police officers to be safe. And how do we as a government protect police officers? Bulletproof vests and cell phones are one step, but the bad guys are getting really good too. And how do we protect our police officers? One of the ways that we can do that is through technology. And the drone infrastructure, no matter what they say in Congress or how we buy these drones, they are sophisticated. We're not making quality drones in the United States. The quality drones have come from overseas. The federal government cannot tie our hands on that. It protects police officers.
And that's what's most important.
Right.
You know, you talked about that reluctance with the chip. I will tell you, we put body-worn cameras in when I was both under sheriff and sheriff, and the response was less than enthusiastic at the time. But time and time again, not that we had that many complaints, we were just able to go to the film and know right away that it.
But when you were the undersheriff, if you remember, I think Elizabeth was one of the first big cities in the state to take advantage of the free drone program that you and others at the county implemented. Mm-hmm. And when we, not the drone program, the body camera program. Right. So when we put the body cameras on police officers, you're right, there was a lot of reluctance. But you know something, Senator? I used to get a phone call a week about some police officer in some neighborhood who was beating up a suspect.
Right.
And then once they had body cameras, I have yet to get a phone call that says a police officer was beating up a suspect, because now everything is on tape. The body cameras have protected the police officers from some outrageous claims as much as it has protected the citizens of our community as well. It works both ways.
Another example of technology working both ways. Let me shift back a little bit, and I'm sorry. And I do want to talk about the state of the city a little bit more. But I really want to talk a little bit about, you have a very special relationship with Kane University. The border shared by both Union and Elizabeth, for example. But you've been there for decades. You have, and I would love for you to talk about that. Students listen to this. And by the way, in this studio that we're in, students actually participate and intern and do a variety of things. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so more opportunities for the students at Kane are extremely important. And I went to Kane. My undergraduate degree is in economics from Kane. My master's degree in public administration is from Kane University. And in 1989, I started on the adjunct faculty at Kane University, which continues today. I teach with Felice Vasquez, who is the chancellor and handles all of the foreign students at Kane. When she graduated from Kane, she was my press officer. and then she went to law school. So her and I worked really closely together in a class called Introduction to Public Administration. I was very close to President Dawood Farahi when he was building the new schools and the structure there. And during that time, in working with the university, programs were instituted that Lamont Repollet has continued to make sure that students in both Union and Elizabeth who may not be the brightest students or have the most financial wherewithal have an opportunity at a college education. And if it's not for people in leadership at Kane University, for a state college to give these kids college experience, how are they going to get it? Kane University is really good at that. They're really good at it now, and that has only grown over the last 20, 25 years, Senator. And I'm proud to be part of Kane University for numerous reasons. Most important, that young people in Elizabeth who may not have had a chance to go to college have a chance because of the receptive attitude under President Lamont Repollet.
And we know that and I can tell you as chair of the Higher Education Committee, that we know that when a young person has that opportunity for college and is able to achieve that degree, that it's life-changing. That statistics show that from an economic standpoint, an income level, a quality of life, that literally that certificate, that diploma makes a big difference.
You know, they have plays over there. I go to the plays once in a while.
Yeah.
On occasion, I'll catch a baseball game when they're playing. Clearly, the Elizabeth High School, I know this is going to air over time, but this Sunday, Elizabeth High School is playing Plainfield at Kane University. That's always a big game. So Kane University is part of the community, and they share their facilities. I'm sure that I'm not an elected official in Union, but I'm sure it happens here too, right? They share their facilities with not only Elizabeth students, but our police department works closely with Kane University as well.
And I know that the Township of Union does as well. And the story I relate about Kane is here in the Township of Union, the Hannah Caldwell School had a mold issue just a couple years ago. Without difficulty or complaint, a phone call to Repollet at 10 o'clock led to a 3 p.m. tour and a 5 p.m. agreement that we could relocate the students, which was going to take months, so literally for the balance of their school year, onto the 1085 Morris Avenue site. When you have that kind of partnership and you can do that, you can be responsive to a community as well, and certainly President Repollet has done that.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's certainly a positive thing. Talk about some economic things with me. Let me shift gears with you a little bit. Talk a little bit about, you've had some, like for example, the mall, right, which is such a huge piece of an economic engine, and others that have been major redevelopment projects along the city. Can you share some thoughts on that?
So when I first became the mayor in 1993, serving on the city council for 10 years, I saw an awful lot of economic development occurring mostly in Jersey City. And in the 80s and in the early 90s, in Newark started as well economic development along the waterfront area outside the train station. I'm like, why can't Elizabeth do some of this stuff? It should be our turn. As a matter of fact, in 1993 and 94, one of my State of the City speeches was exactly that. It's our turn. It's Elizabeth's turn for economic development. And two Danish guys walk into my office at the end of 1993, Peter Agard and Peter Pfeiffer. And they walk into my office and they said, Mayor, we want to meet with you. We just bought your dump. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but that Jersey Gardens was the city dump, not only for Elizabeth, but Union and other surrounding communities all took their garbage there up until 1971 when it was closed because the capacity was now full. So I looked at these two guys and I said, why would you buy the dump for $10 million? And they looked at me and they said, well, we're going to build a mall and hotels. I said, really? I said, how are you going to do that? Now, I'm the mayor now a year, and I'm like pretty naive at this point. I'm saying to myself, well, how are you going to, what's your financing? He says, well, we're going to work with the state legislature, and we're going to do this. And I listened to these two guys and thinking, well, that's an hour of my life I'm never going to get back because this will never happen. So if you remember, Joe, back then, they had LexisNexis. You didn't have Google.
That's right.
So in order to do background checks would take time. And I called Joe Tato, who was one of our bond counsels back there. You remember Joe, he worked with LaBeouf Lamb, and he turns me on to a thing called LexisNexis. He says, Mayor, we could do a search for you. It's okay. So they do a search on Peter Pfeiffer and Peter Agard. These guys are extremely wealthy European men who made their money in tobacco in Europe. And then Peter Agard called me, and he said, Mayor, I want to let you know that my wife and I are renting an apartment on Morris Avenue across from the Tropicana Diner, and we're putting our 2 young kids in the Elizabeth school system.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I knew these 2 guys were for real. Because who's going to move from Denmark to come here, put their kids in our school system after buying a dump? It just doesn't make sense. He did. And I'm like, this guy's for real. I said, well, then what do you want from me? He says, we need a road to get to the inner depth of the dump in order to bring in heavy equipment to remediate and make sure leachate's not going to occur on the surrounding properties. I said, well, what is your estimate on that road will cost? It's anywhere between $6 and $10 million. So I said to these guys, so if I build this road and you guys do nothing, when I run for re-election, the headline's going to be, Mayor builds road through dump, nothing happens.
Road to nowhere.
Yeah. So they said, Mayor, we're going to do it. I said, I went to the city council. I asked for the $10 million to build the road. City council said yes. And the rest is history. They came through with a mall, which has 2 million square foot, 5 hotels on the waterfront. There's another development project that Elbron just did behind the mall with flex warehousing space that abuts the Arthur Kill. And if you go there, the 2 million square foot of space, the 5 hotels that used to pay the city of Elizabeth $63,000 a year in rent for taxes, now pays the city in combination of over $750,000 a year. And the tax abatement on the property runs out in 2031. So there have to be a negotiation on the future growth. I think it's exciting because that land is now more valuable. And you still have IKEA, Raymore and Flanagan, and Fleur de Cour across the street, which IKEA kicked off in 1989. In order to mix retail with the shipping industry and the trucking industry out there is a remarkable thing, and a lot of people from the state legislature, where you serve, to the local governments and the Port Authority, in order to make all of those factions work is pretty fantastic.
It really is. And that mall is one of the busiest malls in the state. And I remember reading at one point it was the second busiest tourist destination in the state of New Jersey behind Atlantic City.
Well, one of the things our hotels do is, run shuttles out there, and they also run shuttles to the airport. If you're delayed at a flight, you can get to the mall in 3 minutes and spend 4 or 5 hours if you're delayed, rather than sitting in a cramped seat in the airport.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. So the complexity, I've got to ask you, the complexity of running a city, of being the mayor that has the port economics, right? And we should talk about that just for a moment. All that happens with the Port Authority and all that happens in terms of shipping, as we just mentioned. You have rail, you have major transportation hubs that come through the city. It has to provide its own set of unique challenges, does it not?
So if I can tell you a funny story,
Yeah,
I think
sure.
you might know the story back in being the mayor this long kind of gives you a history of stories.
Yeah.
So I don't think you might have been just a rookie assemblyman at the time. I don't remember. When did you get in the assembly?
2002 sworn
Yeah,
in.
so you were just there. It was probably just before that when the Port Authority allowed Continental Airlines to buy Allied Signal, and they were going to flip it into a warehouse and then take the property off the tax rolls. And Christy Whitman was the governor, so it was before you went in the assembly. So Mike LaPola was the county manager, and I worked with Mike. He had a thing that was able to stop and weigh trucks. And we put a weigh station out there. And we decided to weigh every single truck coming out of the port in 1988 or 1999. Right when the mall opened in October of 99 is when we were doing this. Because they were going to take a property. Now keep in mind, the port pays us minuscule amount of money because they own the land where Newark owns the land. And I was like, wow, you can't do that to Elizabeth. You can't take a property that's paying us $100 and some odd thousand in taxes and then take it off the tax rolls. Just wrong. So we stopped every single truck coming out. And we towed a lot too because they were in violation, where we'd give summonses. It was going on for a week. The press was all over it. And I get a call from Governor Whitman, and she's about to speak before the Truckers Association at the Sheraton Hotel in Elizabeth. And she says, Mayor, I'm speaking before the Truckers Association. Can you stop this thing you're doing? I said, Governor, if you will veto the minutes of the Port Authority and not allow this to happen, I'll stop it. Her answer to me was, I'm not going to veto the minutes, but I can guarantee you that the end result will not be adverse to Elizabeth. I took her at her word. I stopped the trucks. She killed the deal with the Port Authority buying the property, and we now have Fedway beverages out there on that property with a tax abatement, but still, it's created jobs, many more than a training center for Continental would have created, many more than the other thing. We have 2 warehouses now, and the whole Fedway operation is there, along with Allied Beverage down the street. So if you drink, Joe, it's got to move through Elizabeth.
Yes,
That's what I'm trying to say.
Those operations are incredibly
You've
impressive.
been out there.
Yeah, incredibly impressive. Just in the interest of time, I'd love for you to just flip ahead a little bit. The state of the city. You presented it last week in just a wonderful presentation. Not only from the 250th to all the rest. Can you talk about it a little bit? And
So every year you get to do the state of the city or the state of the state,
Yeah, I
and
said
state of the
state, I
union, right?
apologize.
It's
State of
something we
city.
have to do, right?
Yeah.
And the state of the city is something where you get to recap your successes and talk about the future. And some of the successes we've had in investments in housing in certain parts of the city, as well as the technology for police department that we've talked about, is extremely important. But also the neighborhoods is what's important. And the 250th, Elizabeth was a hotbed during the Revolution. I don't want to remind you, but Union was part of Elizabeth back then, right?
Yes, I'm aware. It's mentioned.
It's mentioned. So all of the spying going on and the fascination, and even the Battle of Connecticut Farms started on Elizabeth Avenue as Minutemen,
Right.
we were called, and the pickets, the Elizabethtown pickets they were called, did these shots and harassed the British marching from Staten Island to Connecticut Farms, which eventually, as we all know, the British were stopped in Hobart Gap, which is now in Springfield, so they couldn't advance on George Washington and Morristown. So the history of Elizabeth and the battles that were fought there and the spying is fascinating. And Hannah Caldwell School, you mentioned that. It was Hannah Caldwell and her husband Jim Caldwell who were the pastor and the first lady of the First Presbyterian Church and Connecticut Farms that eventually were assassinated. And they were the rallying cry for the Patriots.
Yes.
So the history of Elizabeth and how we showcase it in the 250th, I think is extremely important. And we've been working through our tourism and Jennifer Costa and our Chamber of Commerce in order to make sure we try to attract as many people as possible to celebrate the 250th at the cemetery, at the veterans, and some of the revolutionary graves that exist, some of the history of those people. I got to tell you, being the mayor of the city you grew up in and being Elizabeth has been a fascinating experience. I'm hoping it continues for many more years.
And I think many would agree with you. They hope it continues too, because strong leadership brings great results. Our guest today has been Mayor Chris Bollwage of the city of Elizabeth, who we can point to and say with the optimism of the 250th in front of us for many, many more years ahead. Mayor, thanks so much for sharing some time with us today.
Senator, I really appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks.
That's a wrap on this episode of A Cup of Joe, hosted by Senator Joseph Cryan. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you again for another cup.